The fire was supposed to destroy everything. But instead, it revealed what no man was ever meant to see. In the smoke and heat of that August night in 1897, a servant stumbled upon a hidden compartment inside the Crane mansion. Behind a false wall, sealed in dust and secrecy, was a leather-bound journal, its pages swollen from age, its ink still sharp as if it wanted to be read. Inside, 3 columns stretched on for hundreds of pages. Names. Dates. Deaths. Not the records of steel shipments or contracts, but of people. Whole families. Men who came seeking work. Women who arrived for domestic service. Children too young to understand why their names were written in another man's hand. The 3rd column was the most chilling. Beside each entry, a single word, carved into the page like a scar, processed. The servant swore the book carried a smell, metallic and foul, like the furnaces of Crane's steel empire. Within days, the authorities confiscated the journal. Within weeks, the fire was blamed for its loss. And within months, the case was closed. But the truth didn't burn that night, it spread, in whispers too dark to silence. Fort Wayne in the 1880s was a city of iron lungs and restless ambition, its nights lit red by the glow of furnaces that never slept. At the center of this inferno stood one man, Bartholomew Crane. 6'3", silver hair before his time, eyes like cold steel sharpened for conquest. He had risen from the dirt of an Ohio farm to become one of the Midwest's richest men, building an empire of railroads, factories, and steel. Newspapers hailed him as a titan of progress. The governor toasted him at banquets. Priests praised his charitable spirit. But beneath the veneer of respectability, Crane cultivated something more audacious, more dangerous. He called it his extended family. 31 wives. 89 children. Entire estates dedicated not to business, but to blood. Mansions where women lived in separate wings like queens in a divided kingdom. Properties hidden in the countryside, each housing wives who vanished from their former lives and bore him heirs in silence. Society whispered but eventually bowed, marveling at how Crane orchestrated harmony among so many. They admired his wealth, his control, his dominance. Yet behind the laughter of children and the elegance of his wives lay something unnatural, an order too perfect, too rehearsed that on the surface, Crane's wives appeared radiant, content, even devoted. They hosted charities, played piano at evening socials, and raised children who spoke with polished manners far beyond their years. Newspapers gushed over their elegance, their education, their refinement. But listen closely, and the cracks begin to whisper. Certain corridors of Crane Manor were forbidden, locked doors that even wives of 10 years could not open. Deliveries arrived at midnight, wagons laden with crates and barrels carried not through the front gates, but to hidden basement doors. Servants who lingered too long near those entrances reported smells they could not name, burnt meat, chemical rot, metallic damp. The children, too, betrayed secrets without realizing it. One daughter told her tutor she sometimes heard singing beneath the library floor, sad voices, muffled, like prayers in chains. A young son boasted to a playmate that his father had a place where bad people were made good again. When pressed, the children would forget their own words, as if rehearsed to silence themselves. The wives never mentioned their families of origin. They had none. They had been rewritten into Crane's script, their pasts erased, their identities processed like the names in that ledger. At first, the whispers drifted only among the poor, the immigrant quarters, the rail camps, the women who cleaned other people's floors. Men who sought steady work at Crane's steelworks would vanish, their beds stripped clean at boarding houses as if they had never lived there. Families who answered advertisements for domestic service at the Crane estates disappeared whole, leaving no forwarding address, no trace. Some said they'd gone west for opportunity. Others believed sickness had carried them off. But for every missing person, a letter arrived, carefully written, full of intimate details. A husband promising his wife he'd found better work in Chicago. a son assuring his parents he would send for them soon. The handwriting varied, but every letter felt the same cadence, same strange precision. Too perfect to be real. A foreman named Thomas O'Brien began keeping records. He noticed that while other factories struggled for workers, Crane never did. His workforce renewed itself effortlessly, quiet men with blank eyes, who labored like machines, then disappeared. O'Brien began to ask questions. And in doing so, he placed himself on a collision course with the truth, a truth so dangerous that the sheriff, the press, even the church would rather bury it alive. Thomas O'Brien had worked the steelworks long enough to know its rhythm, the clang of molten ore, the sweat of men bound by fire and iron. But what he began to see in Crane's empire unnerved him. Men came in wagons before dawn, slumped over as if drunk or drugged. They were led into a section of the factory he had always assumed was for raw material storage. But no raw materials went in, and no workers came out. Days later, different men, dressed in the same clothes, carrying the same lunch pails, appeared on the floor. They moved with eerie precision, silent, efficient, never forming friendships, never making PLA. NS. When they disappeared, their rooms were scrubbed, their belongings vanished, their families silenced by letters that seemed crafted by a master mimic. O'Brien's unease hardened into horror one night when he followed one of those wagons. It didn't return to the city. It rumbled out into the countryside, wheels crunching gravel until it turned up the long, private road toward Crane Manor. Hidden in the trees, O'Brien watched figures unloaded at the basement doors, women, children, even the elderly, carried limp, their heads lolling, as if already half-claimed by death. The next morning, O'Brien stormed into the sheriff's office, his voice raw with urgency. He described the wagons, the drugged bodies, the hidden doors at Crane Manor. Sheriff William Hendris listened with heavy-lidded irritation, his fingers drumming the desk. When O'Brien finished, the sheriff leaned forward, his words slow, deliberate, venom-wrapped in politeness. You're accusing the man who employs half this county. The man who built our churches, fed our orphans, pays the salaries of men like me. Choose your words carefully. O'Brien pressed on, offering to lead him to the sights, swearing by what he'd seen. The sheriff's face hardened. He threatened to jail O'Brien for drunkenness, for disturbing the peace, for daring to spit on the hand that fed Fort Wayne. Rejected, O'Brien went to the press. But the editor of the Gazette was no freer than the sheriff. Advertising money flowed like blood from Crane's empire. To print against him was suicide. Every door closed. Every institution, the law, the newspapers, even the pulpits, was tethered to Crane's gold. O'Brien realized the truth. In Fort Wayne, Bartholomew Crane was not just a man. He was the system itself. To expose him was to declare war on the order of the world. While O'Brien fought a wall of silence, another set of eyes had been watching. Sister Margaret O'Connell, who ran the Catholic orphanage on Fort Wayne's east side, had begun keeping her own records. Families came to her door in desperation, searching for missing husbands, wives, children. They carried photographs, letters, scraps of hope. Again and again, the trail ended at the Crane estates. Men who applied as groundskeepers. Women who sought work as governesses. Entire families answering advertisements for service. They vanished like breath in winter. Sister Margaret wrote down every name, every date, every unanswered plea. What she saw chilled her. The pattern matched O'Brien's suspicions. It wasn't just men filling Crane's steelworks. It was families, absorbed into something larger, something organized. She tried to visit the estates, knocking politely at their gates. Guards turned her away. Some claimed the families had moved on. Others said she had been misinformed. But the denials rang false, practiced. Then, one evening, Bartholomew Crane himself arrived at the orphanage. His carriage gleamed like a throne on wheels. He stepped down, smiling, silver hair glinting in the lamplight. He brought a generous donation, pressed into her hand, and spoke softly, "Your mission is children. Leave mine to me." The public saw Bartholomew Crane as a family man. Portraits of his wives hung in the great hall of Crane Manor, each framed like an icon, their gazes frozen in painted devotion. But behind those gilded frames was a darker reality. Crane's wives were not partners, they were instruments. Each marriage had been arranged with precision, binding him to powerful families, expanding his influence into banks, railroads, and politics. His children were raised not with affection, but with indoctrination. Tutors were forbidden to speak of God, conscience, or doubt. Instead, the children were drilled in obedience, surveillance, and the art of silence. Visitors noted their uncanny composure, boys who never laughed, girls who never wept, children who never asked questions. They were made to spy on one another, reporting back to their father in exchange for favor. Crane created not a family, but a living web of control, each member bound to him, each a node in his empire of secrecy. When a wife fell ill or a child faltered, they vanished as efficiently as the workers from the steelworks. Their names erased, their portraits removed overnight, as if they had never existed. In Crane's house, memory itself was a weapon. It was a storm that gave O'Brien his chance. Lightning cracked over Fort Wayne, the steelworks trembling as men scrambled to secure the furnaces. In the chaos, O'Brien slipped away, moving through the maze of corridors toward the forbidden wing. He picked a lock with trembling hands, heart hammering like a forge. The door groaned open, and the stench hit him first. Not smoke, not oil, but rot. The room beyond was no storage hall. It was a cavern of cages, each filled with figures too weak to stand. Families he recognized from the streets. Children staring blankly with hollow eyes. Their skin carried strange burns, as if from chemical fires. At the center of the hall, men in white aprons worked with mechanical precision, draining blood into barrels, measuring bone density, cataloging organs as if they were iron ingots. The steelworks was not just a factory of industry, it was a factory of flesh. O'Brien stumbled back, bile rising, as he saw another detail. Above the cages, a gallery of ledgers, neat rows of numbers and names. Families had become statistics, their lives reduced to production quotas. This was no business accident, no madness. This was systematized. Planned. Perfected. O'Brien staggered back through the steelworks, his mind unraveling. Every clang of iron sounded like a scream, every hiss of steam like a whisper urging him to run. He made it to the alley before dawn, drenched in rain, shaking with the memory of cages and ledgers. But Crane's empire was quicker than fear. Before he could breathe a word, men in black coats began to shadow him. Their faces were blank, their movements too synchronized, as if carved from the same mold as the silent workers on the floor. He found his boarding house ransacked, his notes gone, his belongings scattered, his landlady refusing even to meet his eyes. At the Gazette, the editor avoided him, stammering excuses before slamming the door. In the taverns, old friends turned away, their mouths tightening in unspoken warning. Crane's reach was not just law or wealth, it was in the blood of the town itself. O'Brien realized the truth. The moment he had entered that forbidden wing, he had ceased to be a man with choices. He had become an infection in Crane's perfect system, and infections were meant to be cut out. He was not escaping. He was being hunted. O'Brien found himself with nowhere to turn, except to Sister Margaret. She opened the orphanage door in the dead of night, lantern in hand, and pulled him inside before the street watchers could notice. His words tumbled out in broken gasps, the cages, the blood, the ledgers. She did not recoil. She did not call him mad. Instead, she went to her desk and unlocked a drawer. Inside was her own ledger, the one she had built in secret, pages thick with names of the missing. Together they laid the two accounts side by side, his vision of the steelworks and her records of families who never returned. The patterns aligned too neatly. For every wagon load she recorded, he had seen a matching set of cages. For every family erased, there was a corresponding line in C. Rain's factory books. This was no random cruelty. It was infrastructure. Margaret whispered the question that had gnawed at her for years: why families? Why children? What is he building? O'Brien shook his head, his voice hoarse. Not building, harvesting. And in that word, both felt the weight of something larger than industry, larger than greed. It was ritual, wrapped in steel. Bartholomew Crane was no ordinary magnate. To the world, he spoke of progress, steel bridges, railroads, the engines of America's future. But in private salons, behind locked doors with select allies, his words revealed something far darker. He believed society was diseased, rotted by weakness, sentiment, faith. To purge it, he preached the necessity of sacrifice. Not symbolic sacrifice, but flesh and blood. Families, he claimed, were the raw material of civilization. To control them was to control destiny itself. He compared the human body to steel, or must be broken, melted, purified by fire before it can shape empires. So too, he argued, must human stock be tested, refined, and reforged. His disappearances were no random crimes. They were experiments, charting endurance, obedience, and silence across generations. Those who broke were discarded. Those who endured became living tools, fed back into his empire. His wives were not victims but pillars of this philosophy, chosen bloodlines grafted into his system. And his children, those eerily obedient heirs, were the prototypes of his vision, human beings re-engineered into machinery of will. Crane's creed was simple and merciless: the future belonged to those willing to sacrifice the many for the perfection of the few. O'Brien and Sister Margaret began a desperate mission: gather proof, expose Crane, break the silence. They crept through estates, catalogued vanished families, compared ledgers, whispered their findings in shadows. But everywhere they turned, Crane's influence had already woven itself into the pillars of authority. The local priest who had once counseled them refused to meet, claiming God works in mysterious ways. Church donations flowed from Crane's hands, funding orphanages, schools, even the altar candles. Question him, and the entire clergy recoiled, mouths tight with fear and gratitude. Letters to the sheriff returned unanswered, while the Gazette rejected their findings, citing business dependence. Even the neighbors, so enamored with Crane's philanthropy, offered only polite smiles when asked questions. It became clear, Crane had not only built an empire of steel and flesh, he had built an empire of obedience, where loyalty could be purchased, fear cultivated, and truth erased. O'Brien realized the staggering depth of their peril. They were not just investigating a man. They were confronting a system of psychological control so complete, it could swallow entire communities. And yet, even facing the weight of the world, Sister Margaret whispered a plan: we document everything. And we survive long enough to reveal it. Crane had noticed the intrusions. He had felt the tremors in his meticulously ordered empire, the ledger pages out of place, the whispers reaching ears that should have remained blind. That night, O'Brien and Sister Margaret discovered the first signs: shadows moving along estate walls, the quiet crunch of boots on gravel, lantern light flickering in windows where no lamps should have burned. Wagons, once bringing the new workers, now prowled roads near the orphanage, empty yet menacing, as if announcing his reach. Messages arrived, handwritten in the same precise script as the letters that had fooled families, threats disguised as counsel, promises that survival depended on obedience. O'Brien felt the weight of being hunted by a mind more systematic than any human enemy, a man who had turned law, commerce, and charity into weapons. Sister Margaret's voice was low, steady, a single anchor in the storm: we are already inside his system. But if we move carefully, we can still expose him. Every creaking floorboard, every shadowed window, became a potential witness, or a trap. By the time dawn broke, they understood the unthinkable: Crane did not just protect his secrets. He weaponized the very fear of discovery, turning the city itself into a cage for those brave enough to see him clearly. O'Brien and Sister Margaret realized they needed more than secrecy, they needed a signal, a way to anchor themselves and those who sought truth in a world designed to suppress it. They chose a phrase, simple yet charged, "The steel remembers." It became a mantra, a key to lock identity, courage, and memory into one unbreakable pattern. Repeat it twice, they told themselves, and the world of deception thins, letting clarity in. In the shadows of Crane Manor, they whispered it, letting the syllables etch themselves into the air heavy with fear. The steel remembers. The steel remembers. With each repetition, they felt a strange solidarity, a connection not just to each other, but to every vanished family, every silenced worker, every forgotten child. It was more than a phrase. It was defiance. It was recognition that the world could not forget, no matter how much Crane's gold or terror demanded it. And now, they turned to the unseen audience, the watchers in homes, the men who crave understanding of the hidden forces shaping their lives. Speak it aloud. Let the phrase mark you. Twice. Anchor yourself. Only then can the truth be fully seen, and the system of fear begin to crack, however slightly, under the weight of recognition. Even now, long after O'Brien fled and Sister Margaret locked her ledgers away, Crane's empire lingers, etched into the very foundations of Fort Wayne. The steelworks still hum, the furnaces still glow, the shadows still watch. 31 wives, 89 children, hundreds of vanished souls, each life a thread in a tapestry too vast, too precise, for any outsider to fully grasp. Crane was not merely a man of wealth, he was a force of control, a mind that turned flesh and blood into instruments of order. His legacy is one of obedience, fear, and the illusion of benevolence, proof that power can shape reality itself when layered with gold, intimidation. On, and silence. The ledger may have burned, but the system endures, embedded in factories, in families, in communities trained to admire, not question. And the truth, the terrible, haunting truth, remains for those who dare to see it, that civilization itself can be built on the bones of the invisible, the silenced, the processed. Remember this story. Repeat the phrase. The steel remembers. Twice. Let it anchor you. And know that once you peer into the machinery of men like Crane, you cannot unsee it. The knowledge becomes part of you, a shadow you carry, and one day, it may demand that you act.